The tabletop takeaway.
Game mechanics on display.
Three designers share the stage.
Pick a genre and we'll play.
The tabletop takeaway.
All right, well, welcome back. My name is Trevor Muller-Hagel.
I'm Ananda Gunaratna.
And I'm Charlie McCarran.
And this is the Tabletop Takeaway.
Yeah.
Here we're going to talk about our takeaways from this mechanism, this mechanic of logical induction.
Yeah, this is our bonus episode. Actually, does bonus episode mean... doesn't that sort of imply that it's in addition to the regular ones on whatever schedule we do?
I suppose, but I think in this case, bonus just means it's extra fun.
Oh,
Yeah.
right. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, so shake it off. Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
this is our extra fun episode.
This
our
is kind
extra
of
fun
the
episode.
anything goes. We talk about this mechanic, and we've just played three very different games within this mechanic of logical induction. And so I'm now in this episode, all three of us are game designers. We're going to talk about what has inspired us from this mechanic and what we might want to use in our own games.
Yeah.
But
So-
first, is there other things we should talk about just as a general overview of logical induction, things we've learned?
And induction versus
Yeah.
deduction and all of that fun stuff.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit more about the difference between them, and the examples of deductive games that I can think of are puzzles like Sudoku, right? So in Sudoku, you know the rules and you're trying to figure out where all the numbers go.
Right.
In properly deductive games, you know all the information. Well, you know the general rules at the start, and you're trying to figure out where things fit in, which mostly is something that you see in single player puzzles.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And social deduction, one of the classic names for games, you're saying is actually sort of wrong.
Technically, yes.
Because in deduction, the main difference is you're not making tests
Right.
on people.
Yeah. Games that involve testing things and revealing information are very much inductive, I think.
Yeah, because you're trying to find out the solution.
Right.
Where before you know what the thing is supposed to look like for a Sudoku puzzle.
Yeah.
All the numbers will be filled in.
Right.
But you
Just-
have to figure out how they fill in.
Yes.
Versus like, okay, maybe there's no werewolves actually at the table. Maybe they're all in the middle and we don't know that.
Right.
And so you're trying to figure out, everyone's roles using the limited information you have.
Yeah. And I think... Or sorry, Charlie.
Yeah, well, I just think we have picked a very specific niche of games. Like, even if
Absolutely.
these other games in broader sense are maybe in logical induction, like we picked games where you don't know what the rule is. That's
Yeah.
like the key
The key component or the key mechanism.
that keeps which I think is a very interesting
Absolutely.
and different type of a game.
Yeah.
High replayability too, because you really don't know when you're going into it what it's going to be, other than it will fit something like these other things
Yeah.
you've done.
Yeah, and induction gives you an experience unlike most other games because I would say sort of the core emotion and core joy of the genre is the joy of scientific discovery.
Right. Right.
Of taking evidence and working out the rules of the game universe from that evidence. That's sort of the big appeal to these types of games.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think as a designer too, that's one of my main things I want to take away from this is that feeling of scientific discovery.
Yeah, that discovery high of like, okay, now I know this piece of information. Now how can I make that work for me in a new way? Or if it's the whole point, like I've done it, I've figured this out, and that's just a high on its own.
Yeah, it's especially nice when it sort of goes both ways, right? Like you use the clues to figure out the rule, and then you can exploit the rule.
Right.
That's a really cool feeling. Which not all of these quite
that.
Right, but like Alchemist, for example, you figure out the rules for making potions, and then you can use those rules to make specific potions, which always feels pretty cool.
Oh yeah.
And Trevor, you mentioned RPGs in the episode about Visitor, which I think is interesting now that I think about it, because RPGs have so much mystery to them.
Yeah.
And these games also have a lot of mystery to them.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is interesting because they seem like very different one is very story based.
One narrative and you know, lore focused,
loosey goosey, and this is like there is a solution for in most cases. But I think it's really cool because most board games there's not much mystery other than like there's maybe a deck of cards.
Will I get that card
mysterious,
that I want? Right.
But like if you looked at the game, you would have figured out that card. I don't know.
Well, and it's not to pull in a really outside example, but booster packs for like Magic the Gathering. Discovery, right?
Yeah.
That finding what you got
the
and
mystery box.
I didn't know that existed. Yeah.
But like just being able to like then exploit that in a game, and so like it's really interesting how those two have a very similar riding that discovery high, but in very different ways.
I mean, Charlie, you were just talking about RPGs.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think an induction-based RPG could be a ton of fun.
Ooh.
Which actually brings me to a question. Which genres pair well with induction? Or can you imagine pairing induction with? Because it's something that I think can work very well with other genres. Like, for example, Alchemists obviously is a worker placement / induction game.
Sure.
The games we played were closer to pure induction.
Absolutely, that was the core and whole point of the game was that mechanism.
Right.
What other genres are you thinking of? Because I was sort of drawing a blank of how to. I'm sure there's a way to incorporate it in another game, but it does feel, I don't know, tricky.
Well, I mean, like I was saying, if you have things that go both ways, like you figure out the rule and then use the rule to make certain things happen, I'm sure that could fit into a lot of
absolutely.
I like that actually because like in these games we're basically coming to the point where we solve the thing,
right?
But like that is a fun idea where you know that you solved the thing and now you can take that knowledge and use it for good or evil in whatever game. Like imagine Turing Machine. Okay, I found the numbers. Now that lets me do this thing.
Now the robots rise up against us.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose the big challenge there is that in a board game, most of the information needs to be in people's heads.
Right.
So like if I don't know, you have a game where maybe it's a war game and the units, you don't know exactly how they work. But then the question is, how do you resolve things? But I suppose the Turing machine mechanism is one example of how you could solve that, right?
Mm-hmm. It's like use my laser cannon. It has this kind of thing and it's good against these things. And you play it against the defender's verification card. Yeah. And then it shows you how many hits you get against them.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of war games, like Fog of War as a thing is hard to do sometimes in a compelling way in games. Maybe this could be a way to do that Fog of War
where you're trying to
figure out like where the troops are and how they're going to move.
Well, that's a little bit more Captain Sonar as well, where you're hearing them do movements and you're trying. Is that induction or deduction? That's an interesting comparison.
Captain Sonar. Yeah. So the basic idea of that is you have a grid, kind of like Advanced Battleship. You're trying to figure out where they are.
One ship and the ship moves,
but you know it can move. Well, yeah, hidden movement games. Mm-hmm. You also mentioned Letters from Whitechapel,
right?
Where it's not exactly like a logic puzzle. But it is sort of. I don't know.
You gather evidence and use that to figure out what's going on.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You're doing tests by
shooting.
Shooting. Yeah. Did it hit? Yeah. Battleship. Yeah. What is that?
It could count.
Yeah.
I mean, the rule in question is just an arrangement of ships, but.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be very curious to explore an RPG using induction.
Yeah, what would that look like?
Yeah, and that's what's hard. Like when you were talking about having these inductions that create a rule, and then you can use the rule for other things, I immediately think technology trees in Civ games.
Right.
And because I figured out that these things can go together and they create this, and then I can use that and this other thing to create this other thing. So like recipe kind of things or combination-based things.
Yeah, games based on recipes, certainly. Although often once you've figured out the recipe, that doesn't tell you anything else.
Right.
Like it just tells you how to do that one recipe. The cool thing about alchemists, relative to other sort of crafting games, if you can call Alchemist a crafting game, is that figuring out the rules behind one specific potion can help you figure out the rules behind other potions that you haven't even tried yet.
Sure.
And I think that's like
cool.
Yeah, I think that's like the really cool thing where you can like you figure out one crafting recipe, and then based on that you can figure out that other certain recipes must also be possible and what their likely ingredients are.
Sure.
Sounds like we're gonna have to play Alchemists in the future. Maybe
Yeah.
Who knows? Maybe it could be in an episode.
I mean,
Oh, that's early. Sorry.
well, that's definitely going to be my suggestion for the worker placement series.
Yeah.
But
I really want to play it. I haven't played it yet, so you talk about it a lot, so I really want to play it now.
Yeah, it's been a while for me. So, well, one question I had about this: all of these games we played are like race games. You're trying to get to the end first, trying to solve the solution. And how would you make this in not just a race game format?
Actually, I can think of one example. Tragedy Looper is so
It's
if you
cooperative.
it's co-op,
right?
well, semi-co-op.
Or
Well,
semi.
That's exactly
yeah.
what I was going to suggest, actually, is making it cooperative.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So Tragedy Looper has 3 time travelers versus 1 evil mastermind.
Awesome.
And the time travelers are trying to prevent a tragedy, but they have no idea what's going on at the start of the game. And so they have to piece together what the rules of the scenario are based on just
that's
doing things and
cool.
seeing what happens.
That is a great example. I've played that game. That's one where you feel dumb, but you definitely
But
it's fun because we failed right away, and it's more fun because it's cooperative.
Right.
I think that actually answers my question in the last episode about how do you make players not feel dumb. Give them a teammate. And
yeah.
And
yeah.
you can be
that's a
dumb
good-
together, and then
Yeah,
you
that's a
don't
good
feel
point.
dumb because there's 2 of you.
Yeah.
And then later in the game, you get to feel smart because you figure out what's happening.
Right. Yeah.
And that's actually a really good point to me because between these 3 games, Turing Machine made me feel the dumbest. Absolutely. I had the most fun with the Visitor.
But because you were on a team with the alien.
Or if I wasn't, even as the agent, because I don't feel that I don't know. Like I have limited options in front of me, right?
Yeah.
And I'm testing those options against the barrier. And it's not like, okay, well, that didn't work. That makes sense. And you're working on the puzzle, but it's not your fault that it didn't work. And so you don't feel that pressure of like there is a right answer, and if you don't get it right, you're wrong.
Right.
And so it puts less emphasis on that, that test. And I really like that.
I'm curious. Actually, that makes me think. I wonder how much of Turing Machine makes you feel dumb because there's numbers and math. Not this saying that. I wonder if you could do a reskin of it with little
Fairies.
cute puppies, but, and people would still probably feel like they're not
But they'd
getting
be
the
cute,
solution.
and it'd be
But
fun.
I'm just curious if
No.
the presentation somehow could, and it was like an app instead of.
yeah.
Yeah, we need more app games
I mean,
specifically.
numbers can be intimidating to
Yeah.
players.
Yeah.
Even I don't know. I don't feel
It's
like
not the complicated math or anything.
Yeah, it doesn't have that
It's just
much math
equal to or
involved.
greater than mostly,
Right.
most of the time.
And that was not a dig on you, Trevor, because actually you work with math all the time.
Yeah, it's fine. It makes
But-
me feel stupid too.
Yeah. There's maybe I'll try that. Maybe can I do a logical induction puzzle that is more like could be like Zendo, but has like a very specific
Purpose?
logical solution or something
Okay.
like that. I don't know. Could be interesting.
And my question that I prepared is more: can you have a logical induction mechanism or mechanic in a game as a side mechanic, like as a small piece, or does it need to be kind of more front and center?
Well, I mean, I would say Alchemist again, although it is pretty important in Alchemists.
Yeah.
But there is also a huge worker placement and resource management aspect to the game.
Sure. So I'm thinking kind of like going back to our RPG. If like you had an RPG board game, you come up on a puzzle and you're trying to solve a puzzle in the game. Logical induction would be a really just good way to do that.
Sure, yeah.
I
But,
think
like-
the only downfall is that for it to be a good puzzle, it kind of takes a while for people to figure out.
Right.
And it occupies a lot of attention. Like if you want something that's going to be interesting, people are going to need to think about it a lot,
Yeah.
which makes it hard to be just
Small.
a tiny part of
Yeah.
the game.
This
Because
is making me think. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Finish.
well, just like if you think about, I always am thinking about the attention resources of players because
Yeah.
players have a limited pool of attention. And logical induction, I would say, is something that is expensive in terms of attention.
Sure.
So it's difficult to justify it being a small part of the game if you're spending so much player attention on it.
Yeah.
So basically, the game would have to pause in all other respects, and that would have to be
Right, yes.
what everyone focuses on for either a moment or
Yeah.
for whatever it is.
Yeah, you can't really have it going on and have enough attention resources to meaningfully dedicate to other game
Right.
activities.
I feel like it was Mansions of Madness might have had a little bit of that going on. It's been a long time since I played that, but it had little clue puzzles scattered around, and you're trying to like find those while also being chased by monsters.
Right.
All of that. So like, yeah, I think it may have tried that, and that was hard to split that focus, like you're
Yeah.
saying.
Charlie, you were going to say something?
Well, yeah.
Okay.
This is making me think of your prototype. You know, we played where you're trying to be guessing a word while other things are going on.
Are you talking about the one that's Curse of the Genie?
Yeah. Curse of the Genie.
Or the Djinn?
Yeah.
Or is it Genie?
Either one.
Either one.
Yeah.
Great. I'll
But
take it.
I thought that was really fun, but it opened my eyes to the fact that wow, it takes a lot of brain power. You're talking about like
To analyze.
Yeah.
to figure this out. Where I felt like I had to write down everything in what seemed like it was going to be a quite simple game, and I loved it actually because of that. There was a lot of logicking out what this word could be. But yeah, that is another reason why I think it, even like a small puzzle, can take a while to figure out. Yeah.
And I do know like games like Gloomhaven and Descent always get a flack for there being no other mechanics other than fighting. And so like I bet you they even tried to have these puzzles in there, and it just maybe bogged the game down too much. I remember in the earlier edition we were playing, there was a like lever puzzle during the story, and we couldn't even go to it because we were too busy fighting. Because like it's turn based, and you're being attacked, and you're trying to like prevent people from escape. Like you don't have time, and so like being able to have a pause moment where everyone works on the puzzle
Yeah.
might be nice.
Yeah, no, sometimes you have to prioritize what your game's going to be about because it can't be about everything.
Right.
Unless you're making like a artistic statement type of a game,
Right.
which
Yes.
is cool when people do that.
I was going to do that, but we don't have to.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Well, any other thoughts? Final thoughts on logical induction?
I think the genre has a lot of space for innovation.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot you can do with it. So, yeah, I mean...
These 3 games alone really like show the breadth of what it could be, you know? Like this was a wide array, and those is 3 of them.
And my last question kind of is, I'm curious if you could make a game that you're playing all against the game, so you don't need a moderator. But I wonder if there's a way to make like more fuzzy rules, like in Visitor, and
without a moderator.
Yeah,
Could you have a semi-moderator, a person who is both on their team but also part of the game?
oh, maybe.
You could have everybody could be a part moderator. Like if everyone has a rule, and you need to satisfy all the rules.
Ooh,
That's actually kind of similar to my game Crashlanders, where
Yeah.
players are aliens who don't speak the same language and are trying to put together a spaceship to escape.
yeah.
Very
Now that I think about it, it's an obvious choice that Ananda would bring up logical induction games because you have that, you have
Yeah, I mean,
Here's some
I've
genius.
tried my hand
You had
at-
the code breaking game.
Yeah.
Also, yeah.
Yeah,
I-
I've done quite a few of them.
Yeah. We just need to get those out there in the world so people can play them because I think they're cool.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Ananda, for proposing this theme
Yes.
idea.
Yeah.
Yes.
Gave me a lot of good exposure to games I wouldn't have played otherwise. So it's very good.
Yeah. So that wraps up our series on logical induction. Stay tuned for our next mechanic that we will pick for the next series.
TBD.
Hey, thanks for listening to The Tabletop Takeaway. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. So please tell your friends and visit our website at thetabletoptakeaway.com, where you can suggest games and mechanics for us to cover next on the show.